Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on a topic that I know a lot of you are curious about, raising bilingual children.
It's definitely a fascinating area and one that's often surrounded by a lot of myths and misconceptions.
Yeah, for sure. We've got a ton of research and expert opinions to sort through, and honestly, even I've had to rethink some of my own assumptions about how kids pick up languages.
It's funny, isn't it? There's that whole idea that young children are like these little sponges, you know?
Yeah,
They just effortlessly absorb languages around them. And to some extent, that's true. Their brains are wired for language learning. But,
it's not as simple as just exposing them to two languages and bam, they're bilingual, right?
right, it's not a passive process. Consistent exposure is key, absolutely. But it has to be paired with active use of both languages. Think of it like any skill you want to develop takes practice and consistent effort.
Okay, so it's more about actively exercising those language muscles. So then, what are some of the most effective workout routines, so to speak? Our sources highlight a bunch of different methods for raising bilingual children, and one that seems super popular is one parent, one language, or OPO. Sounds pretty straightforward. Each parent speaks their native language to the child.
Yeah, on the surface, it does seem simple, but OPL can get kind of tricky in reality.
How so?
Well, what happens if one parent isn't actually a native speaker of the language they're supposed to be using? Or imagine a family where they live in a community where one language is dominant. It's much harder to maintain that balance.
Right, like you're constantly swimming upstream against the current of the dominant language.
Exactly. And then sometimes it's not even that the community, sometimes it's about one parent being much more dominant or talkative. One of the sources we looked at talked about a French mother living in Spain. She really wanted to raise her kid bilingually, but she had to go out of her way to create opportunities for her child to hear and speak French outside the home.
It sounds like even with a method like OPOL, where the roles seem clear, you still have to be really intentional about making sure the minority language gets enough airtime.
Yeah, for sure. It's rarely a perfect 50-50 split in the real world.
So it's all about this balancing act,
Mm.
making sure neither language falls behind. Now, another method our sources talk about is minority language at home. This approach seems to focus on building a really solid foundation in the less prevalent language by designating the home environment as the exclusive domain for that language.
Yeah, and that can be a really effective strategy. There's actually quite a bit of research showing that families who use this method have a lot of success.
I mean, it makes sense, right?
Huh.
If you can create this space, this kind of linguistic sanctuary where the minority language is not just heard but truly lived, you're giving it a real fighting chance.
Exactly. It allows the child to develop a strong sense of identity and belonging within that language, which can be especially important if it's not widely spoken in the outside world.
Now, our sources also talk about the time and place method. This one's all about structure.
Mm.
Specific times of day or certain locations are designated for each language,
Mm.
kind of like a language timetable.
Mm-hmm. The structure can be helpful for some families, especially if you're someone who likes routines and having things clearly defined.
Right.
But this method does require a lot of consistency, which can be tough as kids get older and have more commitments outside of the home.
Yeah, I can imagine it getting kind of tricky trying to enforce Spanish time when
Yeah.
your teenager just wants to talk about their day at school, which was entirely in English, might lead to some pushback.
Exactly. And it raises the question of, does having all these rigid rules take away from the natural flow of communication?
Right. Does it take away from the joy of just using language?
Exactly.
Okay, so structure is good, but flexibility is also important. Now, this next one is pretty interesting. Natural mixing. Instead of having all these strict rules, parents who use this method just speak both languages organically.
Right. They immerse their child in this blend of languages through music books, cultural events, everyday conversations.
So it's less about consciously switching back and forth
Hmm.
and more about just creating this environment where both languages are always kind of in the air.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it seems like regardless of which specific method resonates with you, the key takeaway here is the importance of creating this rich and stimulating language environment for our kids.
Absolutely. And that's where our role as parents becomes so important. We're not just language instructors, we're building their linguistic world.
Yeah.
And building that world involves going beyond just the spoken word, right? Like think about bringing in bilingual books, music, even cultural events that tie into the languages. You want to create this kind of multisensory experience.
It's about immersing them in the culture too, not just teaching them vocabulary and grammar.
Exactly. And this actually brings us to something a lot of parents ask about: code switching. You know when bilingual people seamlessly switch between languages within a single
Oh,
conversation?
yeah.
Some parents worry that it means their child is confused or hasn't really mastered either language.
I've definitely heard that concern before. Like, is it a sign they haven't fully grasped either language, or is it something else?
It's actually a sign of pretty advanced language skills. Code switching shows they have this deep understanding of both languages and they can move between them easily. It's a cognitive plus, not a minus.
That is reassuring to hear. It seems like we often try to fit bilingual kids into these separate language boxes when their reality is much more fluid and interconnected.
Absolutely. And it's something to celebrate, not discourage. It really highlights that amazing mental flexibility that comes with being bilingual.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the anxieties parents have about raising bilingual kids. One that comes up a lot in our research is the question of fluency. Like, what if a parent isn't perfectly fluent in the language they want to pass on? Does that mean they've already failed?
Not at all. You don't have to be perfect to raise a bilingual child. The most important things are consistency and exposure. Even if your own skills are a little rusty, engaging with the language alongside your child can be a really positive and enriching experience for both of you.
One of our sources shared a story about a Chinese immigrant family, and the parents only spoke Mandarin at home even though they weren't perfect speakers themselves. And you know what? Their child ended up becoming totally fluent, like a native speaker.
It's a great example of how powerful it can be to create that dedicated space for the language. Even without perfect proficiency, it's the commitment that matters most.
That's such an encouraging story. It sounds like creating that immersive environment is way more important than striving for perfect pronunciation or grammar.
Exactly. And the benefits go way beyond just language. Research has shown that bilingualism is linked to enhanced cognitive flexibility, better problem-solving skills, and even a potential delay in cognitive decline later in life.
Wow, that's amazing. So the benefits kind of ripple outward, impacting all these different aspects of a child's development and even their long-term well-being.
It really is remarkable. We often get caught up in the practical side of language learning, but the cognitive and neurological benefits are really fascinating.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a sec and talk about something that I think a lot of parents struggle with maintaining motivation, especially if kids get older. It's easy to get little ones excited about singing songs and reading stories in another language, but teenagers, that's a whole other ballgame.
It's true. Teenagers have social pressures, busy schedules, a million other things competing for their attention.
Right. So how do you keep them engaged with a second language when they're dealing with all that?
Well, it's not always easy, but it's definitely possible. The key is to find ways to make language learning relevant to their interests, to connect it to their world.
So instead of making them memorize verb conjugations, maybe we encourage them to explore music they like in that language or find hobbies that relate to the culture.
Exactly, or connect with other teens who speak the language. It's about finding ways to weave language learning into their lives naturally instead of making it feel like just another chore on their to-do list.
So it's about tapping into their intrinsic motivation, not forcing it on them.
Exactly. And that might take some creativity on your part. Think about how you can incorporate language learning into family trips or connect them with cultural events or activities that resonate with their passions. The goal is to spark their curiosity and help them see language as a part of who they are, not just another subject to study.
It's about shifting that mindset from have to want to, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to connect with people from different cultures, explore new places, and really broaden their understanding of the world?
Exactly. The possibilities are endless.
Now, I want to touch on something that unfortunately is a reality for many parents raising bilingual children, and that's dealing with negative opinions or even outright discouragement from others. It can be so disheartening to put all this effort into something and then have people criticize or undermine your choices.
It's definitely disheartening. But you have to remember, you're giving your child an amazing gift. A gift that goes way beyond just the practical advantages of speaking multiple languages.
Right. It's about cognitive benefits, cultural enrichment, expanding their horizons.
Exactly. And sometimes people who criticize bilingualism just don't understand those benefits. So it's an opportunity for you to educate them and advocate for your child and the value of bilingualism.
So how do we respond to those naysayers in a way that's informative but also empowering? Like, how do we stand our ground without getting defensive?
Focus on the positives. Talk about the cognitive advantages, the cultural connections, the communication skills your child is developing. Share your own personal experiences and why this is important to you and your family.
So it's about reframing the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Challenging those outdated perceptions of bilingualism.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone. There's a growing community of parents who are passionate about raising bilingual children. Connect with them, share experiences, and find support in those shared journeys.
That's so important. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone in facing those challenges can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Community is key. And remember, you're giving your child a gift that will enrich their lives in countless ways. That's something to be incredibly proud of.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to delve into a topic that I think a lot of parents find particularly daunting, and that's literacy. How do we support our kids in developing reading and writing skills in both of their languages?
That's a great question, and one that probably deserves its own deep dive episode. But the good news is the same principles that apply to learning to read and write in one language apply to two.
So we're talking about things like creating that print-rich environment, surrounding them with books, encouraging them to experiment with writing no matter which language they choose.
Exactly. And celebrating those little aha moments, like when they decipher a new word or write their first story, regardless of the language. It's all about fostering that love of language.
But let's be real. Literacy in two languages can feel like twice the work. Are there any strategies for making it feel less overwhelming?
One thing you can do is leverage their existing knowledge. For example, if they already know the alphabet in one language, you can use that as a foundation for learning the alphabet in the other. It's about building bridges between their languages.
So we're not treating them like two separate students starting from scratch, but recognizing that their knowledge in one language can actually help them learn the other.
Exactly. And remember, it's not a race. You want to support them in developing those skills at their own pace.
That's really reassuring. It's easy to get caught up in comparisons or feel pressure to have them reading novels in both languages by a certain age.
It's so important to let go of those external pressures and focus on nurturing a love of language and literacy in both languages. The fluency will come.
It sounds like patience and a focus on enjoyment are really key.
Absolutely. After all, we want them to see language as a source of pleasure and connection, not a chore or a burden.
You know, one thing that really strikes me as we're wrapping up this deep dive is the importance of confidence. Like, we need to instill a sense of confidence in our kids about their bilingualism
Yeah.
and really celebrate their unique linguistic identity.
Oh, absolutely. Our attitude as parents makes a huge difference. If we approach bilingualism with excitement and a sense of possibility, that's going to rub off on our kids.
We got to be their cheerleaders, not their drill sergeants, right?
Exactly. And you know what else? We need to remember that mistakes are inevitable. They're part of the process. Just like learning to walk, language learning involves a lot of trial and error.
So we have to create an environment where it's okay to stumble,
Yeah.
where those mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, not failures.
Yes. It's about creating that safe space for exploration for both our children and for ourselves as parents. We don't need to be perfect speakers to guide them on this journey.
What matters most is that we're consistent, we're putting in the effort, and we genuinely want to share this gift of language with our kids.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to embrace the beautiful messiness of it all, the code switching, the unique blend of languages that each child creates. It's all part of their individual journey.
It's their own linguistic tapestry, right?
Exactly. Bilingualism isn't about fitting into some predefined box. It's about celebrating that fluidity and adaptability that comes with navigating different languages and cultures.
And speaking of culture, one theme that comes up again and again in our research is this deep connection between language and cultural identity. It's not just about learning words, it's about inheriting a heritage, a sense of belonging.
It's about giving our kids a window into another world, a way to connect with their roots and understand their place in a broader cultural context.
One of the sources talked about a family who made cultural immersion a central part of their language learning. They would incorporate traditional songs, stories, even cooking into their daily routine. It sounded like they created this amazing, vibrant, multi-sensory experience for their kids.
I love that. That's such a great example of how to bring language learning to life. It's not just an intellectual exercise, it's a journey into the heart of a culture.
It's about giving them both roots and wings, right? Roots that ground them in their heritage and wings that allow them to explore beyond those boundaries.
Beautifully said. And, that ability to connect across cultures is becoming more and more valuable in our increasingly interconnected world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this sense of awe, I guess, at both the challenges and the incredible rewards of raising bilingual children. It's a journey that definitely requires dedication and patience, but it's ultimately an act of love and empowerment.
And it's a journey that has the power to transform not only our children's lives, but our own as well.
That's a great point. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about language, but about the power of connection and the beauty of diversity.
Me too. It's so inspiring to see so many parents taking on this challenge and really embracing the joy of raising bilingual children.
So to all our listeners out there who are on this amazing journey, remember, you're not alone. There's a whole community of support out there. Folks who are going through the same things, sharing experiences, offering advice, celebrating successes.
Don't be afraid to reach out and connect with others who are on a similar path. And never underestimate your own intuition and creativity. You know your child best. Trust your instincts, embrace the ups and downs, and most importantly, have fun.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the world of raising bilingual children. We hope you found it insightful, encouraging, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing, those books open, and those hearts and minds open to the amazing possibilities that language and culture have to offer.
We'll catch you on our next deep dive.